I don't believe men were created to be pawns in someone else's game. I believe we were created to be steward kings. Men under authority, yes, but entrusted with real responsibility. Not perfect men, but disciplined ones. Men who rule themselves, serve God directly, and refuse to live in fear. This is king, not pawn. Sometimes control feels like strength. And after a man loses his identity, he doesn't just stay lost, he compensates. And the way that most men compensate is through control. Not loud control, not domination, just subtle control, internal control, situational control. They start developing this pattern where everything has to be right for me to feel okay. The environment, the tone, the people, the outcome. If everything lines up, you feel stable. If it doesn't, you feel unsettled. And you don't even notice it because it doesn't necessarily feel like control. It feels like just things in order. You say to yourself, I just want peace. I just want things to go smoothly. But underneath that, there's something deeper that we need to talk about. Control is often about safety. It's not really about order. Because when you were younger, things weren't always stable. So you learned, if I can manage the situation, I can avoid the chaos. From a young age, you likely became highly aware. You could read the tone shifts, emotional changes, tension before it surfaced, and you learned to adjust quickly. You had to because you wanted to smooth things out to prevent conflict before it even happened. And again, that kind of thing worked. And just like before, you avoided problems, you kept things calm, you navigated situations better than most people honestly would. But in doing so, it created a new problem because now you're not just adapting to people, you're trying to manage outcomes. And that shifts into control. You start thinking to yourself, if I say this the right way, if I act the right way, if I avoid this, then everything will stay stable. But life doesn't work that way. You can't control how people respond, what people feel, and what people choose, and yet keep trying. You see this in the pattern of relationships. You're not just present, you're managing. You're trying to keep things smooth, avoid tension, anticipate problems before they come so you can prevent conflict, and over time, you become exhausted. That's just because you're carrying too much. You're trying to hold everything together emotionally, relationally, mentally. And that's not leadership, that's a burden. This is where actually, funny enough, Loki comes in. Look at Loki. Okay, his entire arc in the MCU is built on this. He tries to control everything timelines, outcomes, people. Why? Well, it's because he doesn't want to lose anything. So we have to talk about the fear of loss here because at the core of control is fear fear of losing people, losing connection, losing stability, losing identity. So instead of trusting, you start to manage. But control, it has a cost. The more you try to control, the less free you ultimately become because now everything matters too much. Every interaction, every outcome, every shift, you become hyper aware and not in a healthy way, but in a draining way. You're always scanning, you're always adjusting, always trying to keep things right. And eventually, you realize something that no matter how much you try to control things, they still break. People still leave, things still shift, outcomes still change. And there's always a moment where something doesn't go the way you planned and you feel it, that internal just drop because you realize despite my best efforts I couldn't stop this. And that's where control breaks. And for a lot of men, that moment it feels like failure, but it's not. It's just reality. You were never meant to control everything. This is the truth, okay? You were not designed to hold everything together. You were designed to be grounded while things move around you. That's the difference. Control says, I need everything around me to be stable. Leadership says, I remain stable even when things aren't. Look at Jesus, okay? He never controls outcomes. He didn't manipulate people into following him. He didn't control reactions. He didn't force outcomes. He stayed grounded. He spoke truth. He acted with clarity. He also allowed people to respond freely, even when they rejected him. That's real strength. Not controlling the environment, but simply being unmoved by it. And there's a moment where we as men start to realize that I don't have to manage everything. I don't have to control every outcome. I don't have to hold this all together, whatever this is, for you. And that moment, it feels terrifying because control, it feels safe, even if it's mind numbingly exhausting, even if it's draining, it feels like a form of protection. But the reality is it's actually a cage because you're only okay when everything else is okay. Do you see kind of what I'm getting at here? And that's not freedom. This is why you feel stuck. You're not stuck because you're weak. You're stuck because you're trying to control things you were never meant to carry. So here's the truth that changes everything. You don't need to control your life. You need to be anchored in something deeper than. And that's where this series is going because the next step is not try less, it's let go. Control is not strength, it's fear simply dressed up as responsibility. Stop trying to manage everything around you and start becoming the man who doesn't need to. You're not exhausted because life is heavy, you're exhausted because you're trying to hold it all together.